Hello everyone, welcome to InfosecTrain. My name is Krish. I'll be a speaker for this webinar. So this webinar is about the AWS security architecture. It's actually about the various kinds of security strategies in AWS and the services which we can use in different perspectives to understand how to enforce the security in AWS. Okay, this is going to be an overview session which you will be able to understand about various kinds of AWS services, the functionalities, the features and all. So team, about my profile for those people who don't know me, my name is Krish and I work in the industry for the last 16 plus years on various domains. Especially I was a guy who is working completely on open source and Linux and those kind of things. And from 2010 onwards, I am working in cloud computing, specifically focusing on cloud security governance and cloud security architecture in AWS mostly. And I'm a trainer as well as a consultant for a lot of companies worldwide. And I support a lot of companies on their cloud transition and securing their cloud infrastructure. That's about my profile, team. So the agenda for this webinar is very simple, team. It's about how we can basically talk about the security and talk about a cloud platform, specifically AWS, and what exactly is a defense in depth approach and how this is possible in the AWS cloud platform. Then we'll discuss about the identity, network, traceability, and data architecture. Actually, these four are the main factors which we have to understand when we talk about the security. Then we have a incident response strategy. Let's say if there is an incident happens, how we have to have a strategy to respond to it. And then we will have a Q&A session also where you can ask your queries and I'll be responding to that. That's about the agenda, team. The first thing I want to tell you on this particular security topic is that whenever you go to the cloud platform, a lot of factors are there which can affect your business. Like for example, or which can give you advantages, which can give you some risk and all. Like for example, we have a word called as security. We have a word called as data. We have a word called as functionality. A lot of things are there. We talk about availability, security, data, functionality, a lot of things like that. Out of these things, when we talk about the word called as security, security is the primary word which actually makes or gives us the maximum concern. Why? Because we can't say that, okay, the security is something which is completely the responsibility of the cloud service provider, or the security is the responsibility of the cloud service consumer. So basically what happens is, or provider or consumer actually. So what happens is, let's say, for example, if you go to any cloud platform, like if you go to AWS or Azure or GCP, or even if you're on-premises cloud platform, definitely in the cloud platform, there is one very important risk which you cannot mitigate. The risk is called as multi-tenancy. This risk is there which you cannot mitigate. Because why? Because this risk will always be there. Like for example, I go to AWS. If I go to AWS, what happens is in the AWS architecture or Azure architecture or any cloud platform, you are sharing your infrastructure with multiple customers. Like for example, you're sharing your infrastructure with people who you don't even know actually from different parts of the world. So because you're sharing your sensitive data, your functionalities, and your operations on the same hardware devices from people around the globe, across the globe. So what happens is that it can affect our security in a very serious strategy. So that's why the primary challenge in the cloud platform is we have a multi-tenancy. We even have a lot of more challenges like compliance, governance, third parties. A lot of challenges are there, but still this always forms the first one. Okay. So how we can have a proper security in the cloud platform? If you see the team, when you talk about security in any cloud platform, I'm not talking about AWS specifically. If you talk about any cloud platform, let's take AWS, Azure, Alibaba, or DigitalOcean, or any cloud platform. Whenever you take a service, previously there is a word which we always say, team. Let's, for example, see if I am showing you my AWS console here, or if I am showing you my Azure console here. Previously, the word I have seen many people say that, Krish, we are choosing the cloud provider. That's the most common word which we always hear. We are choosing the cloud service provider. But that word is now outdated. We are not choosing the cloud service provider. We are choosing the cloud services. Like, for example, I will give an example, team. Which is your favorite cloud, or which is the best cloud platform? So we have AWS. Some people will say Azure. A lot of people will say like this. But definitely, team, Even if I like AWS much more than any other cloud platform, to make it very simple, whenever there is a new requirement coming up in your organization or anywhere, the primary point which we have to understand here is that we should never have an assumption that this is the cloud provider for all our requirements. Like, for example, okay, now AWS is providing me a lot of services. Doesn't mean that AWS is okay for all my business requirements. If I want to get the complete business strategy in AWS, the primary thing I have to understand is that I have to choose the services wisely. See, for example, AWS can offer you some services, Azure can offer you some services, or GCP can offer you some services. But out of these services, which of the services are actually most beneficial for our company? So because of this reason, what happens is nowadays the companies are going for something called as a multi-cloud strategy. That means companies want to use various cloud providers with various cloud services. So there is a one question, like for example, Krish, if I learn AWS, then how can I choose a service in Azure? If you learn AWS or if you learn Azure, definitely you can choose a service in the other cloud platform also. How? Because every cloud platform is offering the same kind of services. It's just a matter of comparison. You just compare the services. If you feel the service is best for you, you can go for it. So it's all about choosing the right service for your requirement. Okay. So now we are specifically talking about AWS here, definitely for a lot of things. For example, I'll give you a simple example. So in AWS, we have a service called as Amazon S3. I will say that in my personal experience, I have seen that no cloud providers is offering a better service than this Amazon S3. Why? Because this is the best kind of object storage you can get in the market. Like the same way we have EC2. So certain services there in AWS, which is uncomparable. That much perfect services you can get. But how do I basically ensure a proper security for this? The first rule is that, team, let's say, for example, I have chosen a cloud provider. Let's say I choose AWS. Then I have chosen a service called as EC2. Let's say, for example, I choose a service called as Amazon EC2. So when you say Amazon EC2, Amazon App Runner, if you take a service like that, how do I know that is the best service for my requirement? First of all, you have to know that what is your responsibility and what is the responsibility of the cloud service provider. The primary thing in adopting a service in the cloud platform is that you have to look into the service to meet if it's able to meet your requirements. Second is that who is responsible for what? Like for example, let's say if I talk about AWS, who is actually responsible for what? Like when you talk about Amazon EC2, in Amazon EC2, my responsibility is certain particular things, and the cloud provider is having some responsibility. Like the same way, we have to understand what exactly is the responsibility of the cloud provider and what exactly is your responsibility. So that is why we have something called as a responsibility matrix. That means that, see, definitely if you go to any cloud platform, I'm not talking about AWS or Azure, any cloud platform, the security of the cloud platform. When you say security of the cloud platform, it includes the data center, the hardwares they are having, the physical security of the data centers, and the physical security of the locations, and the background, the backend networking, the backend CPU and memory capacity, the backend storage. So all these things will always come under the responsibility of the cloud service provider. And the responsibility in the cloud platform is based on what kind of services you're choosing. Let's say, for example, if you go for an IaaS service, I can give you a simple example here. If you go for an IaaS service, what happens here is that you can see this. See, if I'm going for an IaaS service, the cloud provider is always responsible for the physical security and deploying the VM. Okay, the cloud service provider helps you to set up the physical security, and they will help you to set up the virtual machine, or in AWS terminology, we call it as instances. But from the operating system onwards, the application, the database, the user authentication, and the security and the patching, maintenance, and everything on that particular operating system is your responsibility only. Like the same way, the primary thing in choosing a cloud service is about the understanding the responsibility of the particular service. But I want to tell you some very important variations habits happened for the last few years. For example, team, definitely in the PaaS platform, you know that. Can anyone tell me, team, in the PaaS platform, who is responsible for providing the platform? Like who is responsible for providing the platform like PHP or MySQL or Python or those kind of things. When you go for a PaaS platform, we know that when you go to a PaaS service, so basically what happens is, okay, we build a virtual machine, like for, let's say, for example, we have a VM, and on top of the VM, they will install us an operating system. And on top of the operating system, they will install us a platform like PHP or Java or whatever it is. They will give us a platform. And on top of it, we will basically deploy the applications. This is what happens in the PaaS platform. But at the same time, in the PaaS platform, what happens is that, see this, almost all the cases, as per the traditional definitions of PaaS platform, this operating system will not be visible to you. This operating system will be 100% controlled and managed by the cloud service provider, and customers are not given access to this operating system. That is a traditional definition. But now what happens is that, let's assume that I am taking a service in AWS called as AWS Elastic Beanstalk. See, it's a PaaS service. Don't get offended by the name. It's a very simple name actually. It's a PaaS service. Let me show you a simple example here. So the PaaS service means it will help us to host a web application or website without managing the underlying operating system or platform or anything like that. So I'll simply click on create an application here, and I can select the platform I want, like PHP, Java, whatever it is. I can select my platform I want. I can select my version of the platform, and I can click on create an application. So as per the traditional definition of the PaaS platform, you're not supposed to access the operating system. But this particular service called as Elastic Beanstalk lets you access the operating system. See this particular service called as Elastic Beanstalk lets you access the operating system, even if it's a PaaS service. So because of that reason, you also have some specific responsibilities regarding your application configuration in the OS side. See, usually what happens is you host an application and the underlying operating system and the platform will be completely managed by the cloud service provider. But here what happens is they give you access to these things also, so that you can customize whatever things you need, like security perspective or some compliance requirements or whatever it is. You can access and you can customize the requirements you want. So that is why I'm saying that whenever you go for any cloud service provider, be aware of what is your responsibility or what all features you will get and what all things are provided by the cloud service provider. So even if these traditional things like IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS and things say like this, you have to be very clear that what exactly they are providing and what is your responsibility and their responsibility. That's a primary thing I want to tell you on this webinar. So first of all, understand who is responsible for what. Then define the features of the application, like what are the features can be provided by the application. And third thing is, see the compliance. See if this particular service is able to meet your business security requirements. Okay, that's the basics I want to tell you as a whole. Okay, that's it. And the responsibility can vary according to the cloud service model. And team, nowadays there is one more thing, like I can see that there is a lot of things like, you know, containers, serverless functions, a lot of things are coming up in this for a long time. And the responsibility can very seriously vary according to the various kind of new services added up. Okay, that's it. So it doesn't mean that you have to go to every service and personally learn everything. Whenever you have a requirement, you can basically go through the service and you can see that what all things are the responsibility and basically how it is shared. Okay, that's it. And the next point to understand is that, team, we will talk about the secure design principles of cloud platform. There is a word called as secure design principles of cloud platform. It can be customized as per the different providers and all, but as per this particular AWS strategy, I am giving 7 design principles for security in the cloud platform. First of all, team, we have to implement a strong identity foundation. Okay, implement a strong security identity foundation. That's the first thing. We have to implement a strong security identity foundation. So why the identity is secured? Like for example, team, let's say for example, we have some thousands of users or more than that users logging onto the cloud platform. When we have all these users logging onto the cloud platform, how do I know or how do I ensure that they are able to do only they are authorized? How do I know that they are getting properly authenticated? How do I know my data is protected? For all these things, for data protection, for confidentiality, for integrity, for availability, for traceability, for everything, we need to have a proper identity and access management. We will discuss more about this in very much detail. in the upcoming slides. Anyway, identity is a primary thing. When you go to any cloud platform, the primary thing which can be a concern is the identity. See, whenever I take my sessions on security and all, the primary thing I will say is the same thing, identity. Why? Because if you are not clear about how to perform a proper identity and access management strategy, you will not be able to define you will not be able to have a security in the cloud platform. And this thing can become complex every day. I can give you some use case in AWS and Azure also, because you will be able to understand the difference, how these guys are differentiating this particular thing. I can give an example, team. Let's say, for example, we have some users. Let's say, for example, now I'm having some customers in European region. When I'm having some customers in European region, what is the compliance requirements I have to comply with? What is the regulation I have to comply with? If I am having some customers in European region, GDPR. I have to comply with GDPR. But the problem is that if I say I have to comply with GDPR, I have to make sure the data is stored in the location. Okay, the data is stored in the location. Either it must be a part of the European Union, or they must be complying with GDPR. So that is, first thing is the location. Then how the data is stored, the security of data, a lot of factors has to comply with. For example, let's say you have an employee who is storing the data of the European customers in China, or who is storing the data of European customers in different country which is not GDPR compliant. So what happens? It is not affecting that employee. It is affecting your organization. So implementing a proper identity and access management, for a lot of reasons, for security, for a lot of reasons, implementing a proper identity and access management is the primary factor when you talk about the security in a cloud platform. The next thing is that, see team, the next very important point is that enable traceability. Traceability in the sense means we can say detection, in other words. Like, I'll give an example, team. If you don't know what you're facing, there is a very common terminology in security that if you don't know what you're facing, you will not be able to respond to it, or you'll not be able to mitigate it. Like, for example, if I don't have a visibility on the cloud platform, see, first of all, the cloud platform means that I'm going to a cloud service provider. I am depending on a third-party provider and the third-party provider's data center. In that perspective, what happens is, if I don't have a proper traceability, or if I don't have a proper monitoring, alerting, auditing, and change management in the cloud platform, I will not be able to have a proper cloud governance. Let's say, for example, team, a person log into my cloud platform, or an attacker log into my cloud platform and do something wrong. If I am not getting notified of that particular thing, so let's say, for example, what if an attacker log into your cloud platform and turn off the logging? What if an attacker basically log into your cloud platform and turn off the data collection, or basically turn off monitoring? So whatever things happen, you must be able to immediately get notified on the changes happening in your infrastructure. That's the next thing. Monitoring and visibility is the next thing, that is enable traceability. Then the next thing is that security in different layers. So what is the different layers we have? That is the next thing I want to tell you, team. We have a word called as defense in depth. Defense in depth. This is a very important word I want to tell you. We will discuss about in detail, because defense in depth in the sense means I will give an example in Azure, because Azure is giving you a very precise diagram for how to implement defense in depth approach. But definitely, team, how to implement a defense in depth approach, that is a multi-layered security strategy. I can give a simple example, team. Now, why are we wearing this? And because we know that we have a COVID pandemic now, we all are wearing some mask, right? We are wearing a mask. Why we are having multiple layers for the mask? You want to have a protection, but definitely single layer can offer you protection. But why we are having multiple 3 or 4 layer masks? The reason is because you want to make sure that even if this particular layer fails to provide you protection, the next layer must be providing you. Even if these 2 layers fails to do that, you must have one more layer. So you want to have a multi-layer protection. The same applies in security also. See, let's say, for example, so basically what happens is, when you go for a cloud platform, or again, when you go for any infrastructure, now don't think about cloud platform. When you talk about any infrastructure, if you want to have a security, defense in depth is a very mandatory thing. Why? Because you must have a multi-layered approach. Why we need a multi-layered approach, I'll tell you. See, by implementing a firewall or by implementing an anti-malware software is not a security thing. So by doing this will not make any changes or any security to your company. But if you want to make sure you have a proper security, you must implement the security in the right places, in multiple layers, so that even if one layer is basically, vulnerable, the other layer can catch the failure. Like for example, okay, we have a DLP solution. If the DLP solution fails to protect my data, I have a IRM or DRM solution there. So we have a firewall. If the firewall basically fails to protect a particular thing or against a particular thing, what happens? We need to have an IPS system there. Like the same way, we need to have a multi-layered security architecture. I will give you a real example of how these things work in the cloud platform. I will show you a simple example because this is the way I am doing in for my customers. The next thing is automation. So definitely, team, whenever we talk about security, definitely for security, we have to implement everything and we have to be alerted. But why? What is the need of automation? See, every day you are hearing a lot of news on data breaches and all. Even recently, for the last 2 weeks, you have heard more than 3 to 4 data breach incidents, right? The reason is because we basically have a lot of security issues coming up now, which is unexpected. And you want to respond, let's say, for example, you want to respond to it. You are saying that, okay, I want to basically respond to a particular security incident. What if you are not able to immediately respond to it? What if you are not able to immediately notified on that? Let's say, for example, I'm having a person who is working in my company, or my whole security team is there, but suddenly they missed a particular change or they missed a particular attack. So what happens there? I want to make sure that there is an automated mechanism wherever it's possible to do automation. Why? Because if I go for manual strategy, the problem is that it can be error prone or it can be giving you a lot of cost challenges. If you make the things more and more and more automated, the response mechanism, the security mechanism, the monitoring mechanism, the alerting, if you can make it completely automated in a cycle, it can help you to mitigate a lot of things as soon as possible. Like for example, I'll give an example. If somebody tried to modify a permission in your IAM, or somebody tried to change something in your firewall, let's say for example, I'm having a firewall in AWS, we call a security group. So if somebody tried to modify a firewall configuration, let's say I am adding a new port number, or I am trying to modify a security configuration. In that case, what happens? I need to have a mechanism which can immediately respond to it and remove the change happened, or undo the change, or block the change. Like the same way, I must have mechanisms to do all these things. I will talk about a career perspective here also, team. Anyway, let's come to the next thing, and after that, I'll talk about a career perspective in this automation also. Then we have a word called as protection. So, team, we have a data. Whenever we talk about data, the primary word we have to understand is about data classification. What is the purpose of data classification? So that is a very important point we have to understand. Data classification. So when you say the word data classification, we classify the data based on the sensitivity and value it provides to the organization. Let's say, for example, team, I am storing some data here in a storage. This is my S3 bucket. I am storing some data here. So based on how much sensitive this data is it a PII or PHI, or if it's a functional data? So based on this required or based on sensitive to data, what I will do, I will classify it. If I don't classify it properly, what happens is it will result in improper security controls. I'll give an example, team. I am having some data which is basically a data of some particular customers. Like for example, let's say this data is belonging to some, it contains some PII or PXI. It's a very sensitive data. If I don't understand this data as sensitive, what happens? I will not make a proper access control. I will not have a proper protection. So we classify the data based on sensitivity and value to the organization. And based on that, we will protect our data, and to make sure, like we will use mechanisms like encryption, tokenization, access control, identity protection, a lot of things like that to protect our data. We are going to discuss about this in detail. Okay. The next is keep people away from data. That's a very common word. The reason why, because definitely we know that, see, having a person who is doing all these things manually doesn't mean that he will make a mistake. But definitely when you talk about manual process, whenever I'm talking about a manual security intervention, it can always bring you some risk. So let's say, for example, the person do some mishandling of data. What if there is a mishandling of data? Or what if there is a modification of data due to some human error? So whenever we are handling sensitive data, if it's possible to make the things automated than manually classifying or manually organizing data, do it. And finally, always be prepared for security incidents. Like what I find, let's say, for example, Now, previously, what happens is we will hear the news of a lot of companies worldwide, who is the top companies worldwide regarding data breaches. But now what happens is that when you go to even a very small company, data breaches are very common nowadays. So whether your company is a very small, the smallest company, or your company is the top company or the largest company in the world, you must always get prepared for security incidents. It can always happen. When you go to the cloud platform, you can always expect attacks, or you can always expect a lot of, it can be attacks, or it can be some unexpected or like human error process or whatever it is, but be prepared for the incident. Like, for example, immediately an attacker gain access to my identity, or immediately a person able to access my server. So hundreds of thousands of things can happen. You must be prepared for all these things. Preparing in the sense means you must have a proper plan for your incident management. Like, for example, there must be a proper incident management plan and investigation policy and a process that align to your organizational requirements. And also we have to test it. Why testing is required, team? If you don't test something, it's more likely to fail. Let's say, for example, I'm saying that, okay, team, we are taking a backup every day, or I'm taking the backup of my systems. But how do I know this backup is perfectly fine? How do I know this backup is properly working? I have to test it. If you don't test something, it's more likely to fail. That's why you have to go for it. Okay, that's it. Let's discuss about these things in very much detail now. Okay, that's it. So team, let's discuss about the best practices in the cloud platform security. This is a very, very interesting what I want to tell you, team. The reason why, because these are the main factors, or these are the key factors which, when you talk about cloud security, especially security in AWS, these are the key factors which we have to understand. Identity and access management, detection, infrastructure protection, data protection, and incident response. I'll give you what all services are basically important for this, or what all services can help you in this process in a very effective way. See, when working with AWS, it's very imperative that your account and data, your compute and everything is basically secure, and it must be only accessible for authorized purposes. And AWS provides a lot of services for that, but we have to be very clear that how these services are protecting us. And worst case, okay, let's say, for example, I know that AWS is offering me a proper monitoring solution. If this AWS monitoring solution is not able to provide me the proper things, go for a third-party solution. So we have to figure out that if the solutions offered by AWS for our requirement is able to meet it perfectly. Otherwise, what we have to do, we have to go for some third-party requirements. Like, for example, I will tell you one example I have felt. So in AWS, we have a service called as AWS Inspector. So AWS Inspector is a very good service for doing a vulnerability assessment. If you want to have a complete vulnerability assessment, you can go for the AWS Inspector. But in almost some 60% cases, I have seen that this AWS Inspector is not compatible with the on-premises, or it's not good for a hybrid environment or a multi-cloud environment. That's why what I will do, I will go for a Nessus or those kind of tools, which is third-party. So don't hesitate to go for third-party tools. But what we have to check here is that if these tools are able to provide our complete requirements. Before you architect any workload in AWS, we need to put in the best practices that influence the security. And how can we do that? Who can do that? And all these things we have to do. And always understand that there is a word called as shared responsibility. Who is responsible for what? Be clear with your responsibility if you want to avoid the burden of operations. Okay, that's it. The first thing is that I want to talk about the defense in depth approach in the cloud platform. Defense in depth approach. So what is a defense in depth approach? Yeah, I told you that it's a multiple independent layer of security. BMS have a multiple layers of security. But how do I do this? Like, for example, let's say I'm hosting an application. So team, let's say, for example, this is my web server. In my web server, we know that, okay, I am hosting a website. Let's say, for example, awsgladiators.com. I'm hosting a website. But how do I know this particular website is actually able to provide me or how this website is secured, how this website is protected? Yeah, we have a firewall. I know we have a firewall. But having a firewall doesn't mean that your website is safe. There can be error in your code, right? There can be issue in your architecture, right? So for these kind of scenarios, what you have to do is defense in depth approach is a very important thing. Whether if you go for AWS or Azure or anything, having a defense in depth approach helps you a lot. And doesn't mean that, okay, I'm having multi-layered security or I'm having some hundreds of layers of security. When you say you have a lot of layers of security, doesn't mean that it is a defense in depth approach. That's a very common mistake most people understand. Why? Because people say that having a lot of security layers or having a lot of security layers simply will give you defense in depth. It's not like that. You need to have multi-layered security, definitely, but you must be able to know where to place it and how these things must be working. So once you plan these things properly, what happens is, let's say, for example, this is my network, this is my server. So the attacker has to break your network, then he has to break your firewall, then he has to enter your computer, he has to break the access control. Like the same way, you must have a multi-layered security architecture. So I can give you a simple example in the AWS perspective. See this team. This is an example defense and approach I have seen for the Slack platform. Okay. So let's say, for example, they have a server which is basically hosted in Amazon. This is their server, which is hosted in Amazon EC2. So what happens is that whenever a person calls slack.com, what happens there? The request is basically passed to the Amazon DNS service. This is the Amazon DNS service. This can help us prevent a lot of attacks. We have a DNS firewall now. Because of the DNS firewall, this can help us to protect against a lot of kind of attacks. So once the person hit the DNS and the request is verified, then he is taken to the CDN service. What is the benefit of going to the CDN service? First of all, the primary benefit is that we can integrate a web application firewall or a layer 7 firewall with the CloudFront CDN service. And the second thing is that the most common attacks we have for the cloud platform, or when you have the servers in the cloud, is a DDoS attack. What is a DDoS attack? Distributed denial of service attack, right? And what is a primary intention, team? What is a primary intention of DDoS attack? Affect the availability. The primary goal of this thing is to affect the availability, right? That means that whatever things happen, the particular thing, the server, the website must be taken down. It must be unavailable. So if you use a CDN system in front of it, what happens is that this particular CDN is distributed across the world. Okay, this particular CDN is basically, what is the CDN, team? Let's say this is my website. I can basically cache the copy of the website in various locations across the globe. See this? Which we call as, these are called as edge locations. This is called as edge location. So basically this is my website. I can serve my website through various edge locations across the globe. Because of that reason, when there is a huge number of requests coming as a DDoS attack, it can absorb the attack very easily. It can basically help us to absorb the attack very easily. And we can basically have a web application firewall to prevent or protect all these kind of attacks. So this is the second layer. And the third layer is that, team, we can have a load balancer. And the load balancer is something which will help us to balance the load to make sure that when we have multiple servers, the servers are having the proper loads shared between them very easily. So like this is a simple example for a defense in depth approach. See, so what happens is when a person wants to call this website, first of all, they have to pass it through the DNS and they have to pass it through the web application firewall and the CDN service. Then they have to pass it through the load balancer. Then they have to pass to the EC2 instance. So here also they have one more layer. They have a security group. So what happens is they have to pass a security group layer. Here we have 4-layered security. See this? Here we have a 4-layered security. Or we can say 5 layers sometimes. Let me see if I can show you one more example of this. Just give me a second, team. I can show you a picture here. I just saw a picture here. It's very interesting one. I have seen this picture in the AWS, some of the links actually. This is not a perfectly one for your requirement, but still this helps you a lot. See this, team. I don't think you can see this clearly, but anyway, see this, team. So a person is trying to access a website. See, the request is passed through the DNS, and then through the DNS it is taken to the web application firewall. Then to the web application firewall it's taken to the load balancer. And in the AWS itself, by default, there is a DDoS protection called as AWS Shield. See, so here we have a protection level number 1, protection level number 2, protection level number 3. Then we have a encryption, protection level number 4, encryption. Then we have auto scaling for other. So we have 5 or 6 or 7 levels of protection in this particular single thing itself. See this? Like this, we can enforce a proper security strategy. So many people ask me this query that, Krish, when we have a, let's say, auto scaling, how can auto scaling help us in this DDoS attack? Because even in one website, I have seen a very, I don't think it's like that. Basically, in the website, I have seen one point that auto scaling can help us to mitigate DDoS attack. Auto scaling cannot mitigate DDoS attack. But when you have auto scaling functionality enabled, it can help us to get some time to respond to this attack. I'll give an example, team. This is my server. This is my website. Let's say, for example, mywebsite.com. This is my server. Okay. So what happens is that whenever there is a DDoS attack happening to the server, if you have auto scaling enabled, what happens? They will automatically increase the number of servers like this. When they automatically increase the number of servers, the attack will get distributed. Because the attack will get distributed, what happens there? Because the attack will get distributed, this particular DDoS attack will not be successful soon. They have to spend a lot of time and effort for the attack to be successful. So what happens? By the time we can understand this attack and we can respond to it. Like the same way, a lot of functionalities, a lot of service. No, that's a very important point. Yeah, I was waiting for that particular point. Actually, see, this is my server. This is the DDoS attack happening. When the attack happens, okay, when we have auto scaling enabled, we will have more servers created, right? But at the same time, there is a very important concern here that, so Krish, basically by doing this, we have a lot of cost also, right? When AWS scale things for you, they will charge you the money, right? If you are having a proper protection mechanism like DDoS Shield Advanced, there is AWS service called as AWS Shield. If you have a Shield Advanced enabled in your account, even if the auto scaling happens because of a DDoS attack, they will not charge you for that. They have a mechanism to completely or mitigate the charges for auto scaling happening because of the DDoS attack. See? So by that way, you can prevent the cost also. Okay, that's it. So what we're trying to say here is that when you have a multi-layered security like this, it can help us to bring a lot of benefits. Okay, team? That's the first thing. Okay. So the next thing I want to tell you is that, team. So first of all, we have to always understand one more thing. So how do I securely operate our workloads in the cloud platform? So in Azure, what happens? I have seen that in Azure, what happens is we can create multiple Azure subscriptions. Okay. We can create multiple Azure subscriptions and tenants. We can say that AD tenants and subscriptions. In the case of Azure, in AWS, the best practice is that always make sure you create different accounts for different workloads. Like for example, team, in our company, we have a team 1, we have a team 2, we have a team 3, and we have a team 4 who is doing separate projects. For every project, we can create one or more accounts in AWS. Why? When you create multiple accounts in AWS, when you have a multi-account strategy in AWS, the advantage is that, okay, when you go for a multi-layered security strategy, so when you go for a multi-account strategy in AWS, what happens is that it will help us to limit the attack interface. See, it will basically help us to limit the attack interface. So what happens, let's say, for example, there is an attack happening in account number 1. So we can make sure that this attack is limited to this particular account only. If there is an attack happening in account number 2, we can make sure that this attack is basically contained in the account number 2. Like the same way, it can help us in managing the strategy properly. So always make sure that in AWS, if you want to have a security, if you have multiple complex projects and teams, make sure you create multiple AWS accounts and manage them using the AWS organizations strategy. Okay, AWS organizations and AWS IAM strategy. It can help you to basically help us with the thing. We can separate the projects. In the project itself, we can separate the development account. We can have a production account. We can have a testing account. See, in one company, I am currently, as of now, I am supporting for a long time. What they have more than 60 AWS accounts. That's a very small company who has less than 100 employees. They are having 60 plus AWS accounts as of now because they want to make it completely like, proper secure way. Like what they do is they have a separate account for every project, and in every account, in every project, what they will do is they have a different production account, they have a different testing account, they have a different development account and all. And end of the day, the whole thing is we have to integrate all of these things together for the effective process. That's a very simple thing. Okay, that's it. Don't think about the number of accounts. Think about how we are managing it. Like most people think, yeah, Krish, if you have more than 100 accounts, how do you manage it? Even if you have 100 account or 1,000 account, the strategy is same. All you have to do is organize properly. With the help of AWS organizations, with the help of AWS IAM, with the help of say centralized monitoring and all, it can be very easy for you. Okay, that's it. So let's discuss about these things in a bit more detail, team. The first thing I want to tell you as a part of this thing is the identity architecture. The primary thing in the AWS security is that the identity architecture. I want to discuss a bit detail about this. The reason why is that because, team, I don't know why, but I think you also agree with me. When you go for the cloud platform, if you're not having a proper IAM strategy, the whole security will go in vain. Okay. First of all, team, the primary thing which you have to always do when you talk about the IAM is that lock away your AWS root access keys. What is a root account? Let's say, for example, I am now creating an AWS account. See this. This is my AWS account. This is the AWS account, or Azure account, whatever it is. See, I'm having an account here. And you can see that I'm using the default username and password for this account. What is a default username and password? Like when you create an AWS account, they will give you a default username and password. And that default username and password is what you call as a root account, the primary account. In Azure or AWS, when you create an account, the primary username and password they will give you is called as the root account. Never use this root account for any operations. Unless otherwise, it's very sensitive, critical. Never use a root account for any operations. Why? Because if you use the root account and somehow if it got compromised, we cannot do anything. The whole account can be compromised, the whole data and whatever things you're hosting in the cloud platform can be compromised. So primary thing is that never use or create a root account. Instead of what you have to do, you can basically go to the AWS Identity and Access Management. See this? You can go to the AWS Identity and Access Management. I can show you how it works. So this is something which you can immediately learn. Like for example, you can learn it while you start learning AWS. Don't have to do it only when you work. This is something which you have to practice while you start learning AWS. So never use your root account. You can go for the IAM console, go to user section. See here, team, you can see I'm having a user here called as admin user. Like the same way, just create a user. It's very simple task. You can basically create a user here. Like let's say, for example, I am creating a user called as admin. Okay, this is my username. I can provide the access to my management console or application access, whatever I want. I can give a password for this. Anyway, I'm giving a password. And then you can give him the permission called as administrator access. There's a permission called as administrator access. See this? By giving this permission, you can do almost 90% things which can be done by this root user. Don't forget, while giving this permission called as administrator access for a user, you can get almost 90% permissions of the root user. So you can do all your regular routine tasks by going for this user, right? So never use your root account is the primary thing. If you want to have a security in cloud platform, never use your root account or root account for management. For all the routine management operations, make sure you create a separate user and give him the admin privileges and let him do that. Okay. And the next thing is that we have a root account. The root account username and password, the root account credentials must be kept in a very secure place, and we have to make sure that there is a multi-factor authentication plus login notifications enabled. Don't forget, we must have a multi-factor authentication with login notification enabled for root account. It's a very mandatory thing, team. What is this multi-factor authentication? I'll explain. Anyway, I'll explain in the next slide. So whenever you have a root account, make sure you enable the multi-factor authentication and enable login notification. What is login notification? If somebody tried to log into your root account, you will get an immediate email in your inbox. This is mandatory. The next thing is that even in very large companies, like I can say the companies where there are more than 10,000 people, 10,000 employees or more than that, I can see that last time also when I went to a company, I have seen this mistake that people are trying to share the credentials. Even see, you go to your company, you have an access card to enter your company. So what happens is, okay, you tap your access card, and your partner, although your friend, will also take your tailgate, piggyback you. See what happens there. The identity system is completely compromised there. So always make sure that most of the cloud providers, like even if you go for AWS or Azure, especially AWS, the IAM is a complete free service. This is completely free, no cost at all. This is completely free, no cost. So because it is completely free, you don't have to hesitate creating users. You can create thousands of users, millions of users. How much employees you have, make sure if they want to have cloud access, create a user account for them. If you need it, actually. Don't hesitate to create user accounts. Okay? And never share the credentials. The next thing is that this is a very important thing. We have a mechanism called as groups. What is a group here, team? Let's say, for example, see, I'm having two users here. We have a two users called as admin user and cloud group. See this? So what happens is, if I'm having, definitely, yes, we can integrate the AD. Yeah, that I will basically come to that. That's a very important point, integration with the third party. So team, what happens is, if you go for, let's say I'm having some 10 users. Let's say, for example, we have a user called as Abhinav, Adam, Aditya, and Aman. What happens is that when we have these 4 users who need the same permission, or who are basically working in the same project or same permission, don't use the mechanism called like giving the permission separately. Add them to a group. You can basically create a group here. Let's say, for example, add them to a group called as administrators. And what I will do is, I will add both of these guys to the group called as administrators. And I can assign the permission to this group. By assigning the permission to this group, whoever people who is the member of this group will get the permission. Okay, that's a very interesting strategy which you have to follow. And then the next thing is grant a least privilege. So team, grant a least privilege means that when you say least privilege, that's a very confusing word sometimes. Why? Because so even if I have seen many people say that, yeah, Krish, when you try to give permissions, let's say I want to give some permission to this guy. So what we do is we basically click on add permissions. You can see a lot of permissions here. See this? Okay. See, you can see a lot of permissions here. See this? All these permissions or all these policies. Policy is something which will help us to give permission. See this? We have a lot of permissions here. You can go for a lot of things are there. Most people rely on these particular default permissions. Never use this. The best way is that always make sure we create customized policies as per our business requirements. What is a customized permission? See this? This is a customized policy made by me. So for example, okay, I want to make sure this particular user, we have a user here called as admin user, right? So I want to make sure that this user must be able to manage a particular server. Okay, I want him to manage a particular server. Okay, when I say I want to manage a particular server, one common scenario I have seen is that most people, okay, first of all, we have to give permission to Amazon EC2. Will give a complete read-write permission. But the problem is that if you give a permission to Amazon EC2, and if you give a read-write permission, that means he is able to manage all our servers. I don't want to do that. If you go for a default permissions in AWS, they will give you the policy where the person is able to access everything in Amazon EC2. But if you make a custom policy like this, see this policy will ensure that the person will be able to manage only this specific server. See this? The most common approach we have for, I'm not just heading to a career path for this. That's why, sorry for this interruption. So basically what happens is that team, when you go for this programming things, I don't want you to learn, let's say JSON. This is completely JSON. I don't want you to learn JSON completely. There is no point you learn JSON completely. It will not help you anything. If you learn JSON completely, it's definitely good. Okay, you learn something, that's all. Except that it will not give you any benefits. It can take a lot of time for you. To avoid it, learn this policy. That's enough. See, now I'm telling you, team. Let me give an example here. I want to give an example. Let's do it this way. We have a policy here. Now I'm asking you, team. This is my server. Okay, this is my server. This is my server's ID. For every AWS services, there is a specific AR and Amazon resource ID is there. So I'm asking you, team, how do I ensure that this person can manage another instance? Tell me, how do I customize this policy for a person to manage another server or another instance? So what I will do is I will remove this particular thing and add the new ARN. Okay, I want to make sure that the person is not able to restart the server. What I have to do, team? Tell me. I want the person to completely avoid restarting a server. So what I have to do here? See, if you can learn this way, just first of all learn the structure. Okay, learn the structure like it will start with a curling bracket, end with a curling bracket. We have statements like this. Anyway, we can take it in another day. Anyway, I will definitely publish a YouTube video for this, how to read your JSON policy, and that is something which is all required for you to learn this particular thing. But make it very simple, team. By having this top-down approach, that you have a script, you have to customize it. If you are able to do that, you are able to survive in this identity access management. That is what I done in my personal experience. See, whatever policy you want, it is available. Like for example, okay, I want to have a policy, okay, IAM AWS policy to block EC2 access, or let's say S3 access. If you search it like this, you will get the policy you need. You can basically get the policy here, copy the policy, customize it. That's enough for you. See, you can basically copy the policy. You can customize it. Once you do that, see, I'm just simply copying the policy, replacing this bucket name with the actual bucket name. This is my bucket name. I will replace this with the actual bucket name I'm having. That's it. So all you have to know is to how to customize things and to how to just simple modifications. Simple customization is all what you require. I swear on that. It's very simple. I am able to manage things for a long time very effectively, but just by these customizations. So if you ask me, Krish, do you know complete Python? No, I'm not able to know Python. For sure, I don't know Python. For all these years, I don't know. But still, if you give me a script and tell me, Krish, we want to do it like this, I can simply customize it. Because we have a lot of resources in the internet, just customize it. That's very simple. Learn in that way. Top-down approach is what we need. Top-down approach, nothing more. Do a top-down approach. So automation is mandatory and you have to learn scripting. At least JSON and simple Python is required when you go to any security industry. Okay, that's it. Okay, the next thing is saying that is how you can basically assign a proper, what we can say, that is how we can assign a proper permissions or a proper fine-grained access control permission to a user. Then the next thing is that the main challenge is that, see, this is a statement which I have copied from the AWS website, but to be honest, I don't prefer this. I don't know, but you can basically post your views if you want, but basically, I don't prefer this. Why? Because so this is what you call as AWS managed policies. That means these are the default permissions you can assign by AWS. See this is some default permissions you're having. If you go for the default permissions, it is perfectly fine for a top level approach. But when you want to make the policy more and more stringent, if you want to make the policy more and more fine-grained, you have to customize it. I'll give you a simple example. I want to allow access to Amazon S3. Just type S3, you will get the policy here. Copy the policy and customize the way you want. That's enough. Okay, that's it. And I'm sure that team, if you do it some 3 to 4 times, you will be able to do it very easily. Because it's nothing you have to learn. Like there's no gods in this. Even if you're good in JSON, you have to learn this separately. Then why we have to learn JSON? We can learn directly this. Okay. The next thing is validate your policies. This is a very common thing I have seen many people are missing. Like you write a policy, team. Let me show you one of the policies I have written here. So team, this is a very important policy. This policy is telling you that the person will be able to access everything in the AWS account only if he is logging in from this IP address. That is the main goal of this policy. The person will be able to do everything only if he is logging in from this IP address. That's the policy. While you get a policy like this, make sure you review the policy from end to end. I want to make sure that I review the policy. It's not about the policy language. I want to know what all permissions I have specifically given to the policy. Why? Because if I don't know what, let's see this policy key. So in this policy, you know that not only IP-based, you can have a IP-based access, you can have a location-based access, now you can have a device-based access, lot of things are there, time-based access, date-based access, lot of things are there, location-based access, everything is there. So in this policy, All you have to do is go through the policy, read the language, and see if there is anything suspicious in this. If you feel anything suspicious, customize it, that's all. So review the policy properly, validate the policy properly, and verify it if you're getting the permission. And some people ask me this query that, Krish, when you go for these kind of policies, the main challenge most people are facing is that, how do I know the spacing and all? See, this spacing is nothing you have to worry. These things are just for aesthetics. That's all. Like, I just want to make sure this policy looks cool and I'm able to understand things very effectively. That's why we have this particular, proper spacing and all. Even if you write the policy like this, it's perfectly fine. See this will not change the policy anything. And one more thing, you don't have to spend time on anything like this. Let's say, team, I have this policy. I want to make this policy look a bit, cute. So just go to this policy, go to your browser, open JSON formatter. Just type JSON formatter. You will get a lot of websites. See, open a website called a JSON formatter. Any website is fine. Refresh it. Let's see. No, we can go to another site. No problem. So we go to a website. Even you have a extension of that also. Yeah, they can have a JSON. So all I have to do is just simply copy this particular code here. See, they will format it for me. See this. The code is already formatted. See, formatted, beautify. See this. I get the complete code which is beautified or formatted. See, it's perfectly fine now. If you basically go for the policies, it's all about everything is available for you. All you have to do is customize things. That's all. Okay. By using that way, you can learn these things very easily. Don't have to learn everything completely to be master of it, but learn how to work in a smart way on this. Next thing, team, not over. Identity is the largest thing actually you have to learn. The next thing is, team, there is use customer managed policies instead of inline policies. So basically what happens is, always make sure you create your own policies. Okay, always make sure you create your own policies. Then we have a mechanism called as access review. In AWS, we have a mechanism called as access review. See this, if you go to the IAM console, you can basically see that there is an access analyzer. By using the access analyzer, see the permissions you basically get. Then configure a strong password policy. How do I configure a strong password policy? Very simple. I go to the IAM console in AWS. I can basically go to the account settings. I can see the password policy. Click on change password policy. Customize the password policy as you want. See this: password length, password complexity, password expiration, password reuse. I can basically set the policy as per my company standards. Very simple. Okay. Then we have a enable MFA. I won't tell you what exactly is MFA in a very simple words. So team, when you say multi-factor authentication, most people think it as two-factor authentication. 2FA is also MFA, but when you want to say MFA, team, we have three things. Something we know, something you know. Then we have a something you have, and then something you are. We have three things. What is something you know? Like passwords, PIN numbers, OTP. All these things are something you know. And what is something you have? Something you have means like certificates, key files. OTP is basically something you have actually. You get the OTP, and all these things are something you have. And something you are means your biometrics, right? So if you want to say multi-factor authentication, you must have any two of this, at least two of this. Like I'll give an example, team. Let's say, for example, now you are trying to log into your cloud platform. You're getting a username and password. You are entering the username and password. Is it a multi-factor authentication, team? No. It's not a username and password. So it's not a multi-factor authentication. It's a single factor authentication. So what I will do is, okay, after this, you have an email notification. You have to click on the email notification, or you have to get an OTP in your mobile phone. So because this is something you know plus something you have. I will give you one more example. Let's say, for example, team, I'm trying to log in. When I'm trying to log in, first they're asking me, scan your fingerprint. Scan your fingerprint. So you place your fingerprint at the fingerprint scanner. And after that, then they're asking you that, read the text displayed, read the message displayed, read the text. Is it multi-factor authentication, team? See, so scan your fingerprint means what? It's basically asking to scan your, it's a biometric thing. And read the text displayed means it's a voice recognition. Voice recognition also biometrics. So because it's something you are, this is not multi-factor. If you want to say multi-factor, you must have at least two of this. So the next question you can have is, so Krish, do you think MFA is safe? Definitely, I don't say MFA is safe. Even you have a captcha now, captchas are also bypassable very easily now. So when you have a MFA doesn't mean that it's safe, but it is much more safer than having a single factor authentication. That's a primary thing. MFA is much more safer than having a single factor authentication. The next thing is, team, this is a AWS specific concept. We call it as roles. There's a very important AWS specific concept, roles. I'll give an example for this role, team. This is a very, very important thing I want to tell you. Even if this is something for people who already know AWS, but definitely you can understand this. When you say roles in AWS, what happens is that, let's say this is my instance. This is my AWS EC2 instance, my server, my VM in Azure language. Okay, this is my EC2 instance, or we can say my server. In the server, what happens is, team, okay, in the server, what happens is, I'm having an application. My application want to access an AWS service, let's say S3 bucket, or any AWS service. This is an instance server. This application, AWS instance, want to access an S3 bucket or any AWS service. So what happens is that, team, when this happens, okay, when this particular thing happens, if you want your server to access your S3 bucket, first of all, you have to create a username and password. You have to basically go to the AWS IAM console and go to users and create a service account. You know the service account in Windows concept, right? See this, you can basically create a programmatic access. So by using this mechanism, you can provide the access to this application. But the problem is that when you are using a user account for giving access to these particular scenarios, end of the day, it will be always easy to compromise. Or what happens is, the attackers will be able to get this somehow. Let's say if an attacker is able to get this credentials, they will be able to access this particular storage. That is where we use the concept called as roles. By using the mechanism called as role, what happens is, you are not creating a user account. Don't forget, you are not creating a user account. We have a server here in AWS. I am attaching something called as a role to this account, role. By doing this, I am authorizing this instance without giving any credentials in the front end. Without passing any credentials in the front end, I am giving this permission to the server to access this particular storage without entering credentials manually. So what happens here is, whenever I host an application on this, the application which is hosted on this instance will be able to access the S3 bucket without entering the credentials, because the credentials are passed in the backend by AWS itself. So role is like a user, but the only difference is that I'm not generating any credentials and giving it to any users. I'm not creating any credentials or giving it to users. I'm giving the credentials to the server, so the server will be able to access the storage. That's the concept of role. Then you can learn this about more in role. If you work in an organization, or if you want to work in a enterprise scenario with multiple AWS accounts and all, without roles, you can't do this. Role is the key for learning IAM. Most people say policy is the key, but I will say role is the key. Why? Because how much efficiently you can manage the roles, that much efficiently you can control the access and minimize the security risk in AWS. Okay. So the next thing is, team, do not share the credentials. So as we discussed earlier, never share the credentials. Always create separate username and password, and the credentials must be rotated. Like there is a proper policy. So Krish, what is the default period? There is no default period, but you have to, as per your company's strategies, you have to create a strategy where like 3 months or 2 months or 6 weeks, you have to create a strategy to make sure you rotate your, or means update your credentials properly. And any orphan credentials, any unnecessary accounts, if you feel there is any account which is not used or unnecessary, which is not required, remove the credentials. And use policy conditions. What is a policy condition, team? I showed you earlier, right? This is a policy condition. See, only if the person is logging in from this IP address, give him full access. This person can be administrator if he is logging in from this IP address, like the same way. And monitor the activity in your AWS account. Make sure we have a complete monitoring. We are going to discuss that monitoring also in very much detail. So team, do you mind, before we go to the monitoring part of it, can I show you something in Azure also, if it's okay for all of you? Even if, I know it's an AWS webinar, but I want to show you one strategy in Azure also. So team, I can show you a simple example in Azure also. That's a very interesting thing. So Azure I'll type zero trust model. This is something I found very interesting. That's why I want to show it to you. You can do it in AWS also, but in a different way. That's all. I want to show you how these companies or organizations are having a proper strategy like this. This is the one I want to show you, team. It looks very interesting, actually. So what happens is, a person is trying to log into the Azure account, okay, from his PC or iPad or laptop or mobile phone. He's trying to log into an Azure account. Obviously, the first step is always to have a multi-factor authentication. You have to make sure that the username and password plus a multi-factor authentication mechanism. That's mandatory. Without this, you cannot have a security. MFA is mandatory. Okay, after this, we can basically put something called as access conditions. What is an access condition? Like, for example, let's say, okay, now Krish is trying to log in. He is entering the username and password of Krish and the password. But when he enters that, the next thing they will look into is the access conditions. What is an access condition? Okay, as per the updates, the person is, as of now, the person is in India. But if the request is coming from a different country, that means there is some issue with the location. It can be a spoofer, right? Usually this person will logging in from this iPad or this PC. If there is a new device trying to log in, that means there is a suspicious thing. What is the risk rating of the user? There's a user risk rating. Like, for example, if there is many attempts or attacks for the user is in a high risk profile. Exceptions. So based on all these things, I will decide whether if I want to give access or block access. So what is the point here? It's not only about entering the username and password. It's about verifying a lot of other factors also. So based on this, whether I will allow access or deny access. And I will verify this continuously. This is an example. Like this, I will give you one more thing. There is a word called as, in Azure, there's a word called as privileged identity management. I don't know if it's in AWS, it's there, but in Azure, it's definitely there. I liked it very much. So team, why I want to tell you this is, let's say, for example, we have a user. We have a user here called as Krish. So this user belongs to the group called as database administrators. Example, we have a user here called as Krish, who is a database administrator. But my challenge is that the database contains very sensitive information. If this account is compromised, the whole company database can be compromised. So what I will do? I will do something called as a privileged identity management. Privileged identity management. What is a privileged identity management? That means that when you say privileged identity management, it means that this user will not be given permission every time. So this user is allowed to be the admin, but as of now, this user is not having permission. When the user log in, the user will log in, and every time he log in, he has to request for the permission. Don't forget. So this user is an administrator, but he will not get permission for this. This permission is not there for him. He log into the AWS Azure account. He has to request for permission every time. And a person has to approve it, like his manager or a person who is basically working on top level has to approve this. And this user will get the permission for the next 2 hours or 3 hours based on how much hours I'm giving the permission. So what is the advantage there? Even if an attacker is able to get the access, he has to request the permission. I can verify if the user has requested the permission and approve it. If the permission is not requested by the user, I can block it, right? So that's a very interesting thing. Privileged access management. See this? When I go to a privileged access management, what happens is that, see, I have to first of all request for something, and it must be approved by the manager or a person who is basically managing it. Then only I'll get the permission for the next few hours. This makes the things more secure. Like every cloud platform is having some kind of mechanisms like this. Okay, that's it. So take the next one is, okay, I want to tell you one more thing. This is about the basics of AWS. Okay, this is about the identity access management basics. Anyway, one more thing is that, let's say, for example, if you want to reuse your credentials, let's say, for example, you have an Active Directory in your on-premises, you want to use the same credentials, it's also possible. Identity federation is also possible in AWS. Just go to the identity providers here. Let me show you that. See, I can go to the identity providers, and by using the identity providers, I can simply add the providers here. Like I can use an Active Directory or a Facebook account or a Gmail account, or I can use all these things actually. So basically, reuse the same identity, username, and password in AWS as well. That's also possible. Okay, that's it. That's about the basics of AWS identity architecture. The next thing is we have a detection. This is something which I found very complex. When you go to any cloud platform, this is something which I personally found a bit complex. Why? I don't know why, but still I'll tell you the reason. When you go to the cloud platform and you see this detection or detective controls, it can be very challenging because unless otherwise you know how to manage these things, it can give you a challenge. You can use a lot of detective controls to identify a potential security threat or incident. Like for example, team, we have things like AWS CloudWatch, AWS CloudTrail, AWS Config, AWS Guard Duty, AWS Macy. A lot of services are there which can help you to provide this particular strategy. But as we always say, if you don't know what you're facing, you are not able to respond to it. More than response, the primary thing any organization has to have is the detection. If there is no proper detection strategy, if you are not able to understand that you are basically affected with particular kind of risk, you will not be able to respond to it. So detection must be very clear. So I got a very interesting picture from a website. I'll show you that thing. See this. This is the best detection picture I have seen. See this. We have a tools like we have a CloudTrail. It's a logging thing. It will help us to log all the API calls. What, who, when, where, and all API calls. We have a tool called as CloudWatch for monitoring. We have a tool called as Macy, the DLP solution. We have a tool called as AWS Config for change management. We have a tool called as Inspector for vulnerability assessment. So like this, we have a Guard Duty for, it's a kind of SIEM solution. We have a Trusted Web for giving advices. By having all these tools and making it responding, like what is the response? Immediately notifying us and to do some triggers. By responding these things in a proper way, we will be able to have a proper detection strategy. Detection is the key. If you want to respond, you have to detect. And definitely, team, now AWS is offering a lot of services, especially there is a new service called as AWS Security Hub. This is not a service which can do something. It will provide a visibility to all these things in a single console. That's all. Okay. And you can able to integrate with third-party tools also. There's a lot of third-party tools in the market for doing all these things. Okay, that's it. So I can give you some very simple things like in AWS, you can implement a lot of detective controls by processing the logs, processing the events, continuous monitoring, continuous auditing, automated analysis, alarming things. Let's say, for example, there is a huge data traffic usage. You can increase your instances. You can do auto scaling there. Okay, a lot of things like that. First of all, team, configure the services and application logging. Logging is something, trails and logs, both are same actually. By logging is mandatory, like for everything, for your network, for your instance, for your AWS accounts, for everything, do the logging. Logging is mandatory. Configure the logging throughout your workloads, like including your application logs or resource logs or service logs, like using services like CloudTrail, CloudWatch, Guard Duty, Security Hub. By using all these things, configuring a proper logging strategy is a very important thing which you can use. The next thing is that, team, as we discussed previously, we have something called as a multi-account strategy. In every company, you will see, you can basically keep this word actually. You can see a multi-account strategy and multi-cloud strategy. These two things are there in every company now. Multi-account strategy, that means using multiple AWS accounts, and multi-cloud strategy by using multiple cloud providers. But if you keep all your log files or monitoring data and everything separately in every account, that will not give you any benefit. At the end of the day, you will lose everything. To avoid that, centralize all these things. Centralize all these things to a centralized account. We can say that the monitoring account or some accounts we can create. We can centralize or we can aggregate all these log files like VPC flow logs, CloudTrail logs, CloudWatch logs. We can do application logs. Everything we can aggregate to a centralized account. And we must be use mechanisms like AI, the help of AI, ML mechanism, the help of giving proper rules. We can analyze these things and we can detect the anomalies and unauthorized activities. Okay, that's it. And the best service for doing to have visibility for all these things is called as the AWS Security Hub and AWS Guard Duty and all. Okay, that's it. And the next thing is, team, we have something called as a automate the response to events. So I will give you a simple example for automate response to an event. Let's say Now we have an instance. Let's say, for example, team, assume that I'm having an instance here, a server here. Okay, I'm having a server here. I'm not having it now. Let's see. Let's simply assume that we have a server here or instance here. When we have an instance here or server running here, what is my primary challenge? I want to make sure this thing completely protected. Let's say, for example, this is the security group used by the instance. Okay, so I'm an attacker. Assume that I'm an attacker. As an attacker, what I will do is I will basically access the security group and allow a permission. I will add one more role. Let's say I am adding a remote weird port number. Let's say, for example, I am adding a port number for database. I am allowing all the IP addresses. That means I am making a change here, right? This change will make this whole infrastructure vulnerable. Definitely what you can do, okay, whenever you get notified, okay, when you get notified on this, okay, let's say, for example, when you basically get notified on this, you can respond to it. I'll give an example. Now, okay, tomorrow you're getting an alarm that somebody has modified the security group. You can go there manually and remove this. I know that. But if you try to do that manually and wait for that particular time period, what happens there? By then the attacker will gain access and do whatever things he wants. So you can't wait for that particular response to happen. That is why you have to automate it. I'll give a simple example. Let's say whenever there is a change or modification happening in this particular security group by any person except the administrator, it will basically trigger an alarm. And this alarm will trigger a Lambda function. Lambda is a serverless computing thing, okay? It will trigger a Lambda function, and the Lambda function will delete the change or undo the change which happened. Very simple. So immediately when he makes the change, within a matter of seconds, what happens? The change will be reversed or it's undo. So automation is a key. So next question comes here. So Krish, how do I know all these things? How do I do this automation? I'm not good in programming. See, it's not like you have to do everything. You're a security architect, or you're a security administrator, or you have a security operations expert. You have developers in your company, they can help you with this process. They can simply write you a script. All you have to do is customize the script or modify the script and make it run. That's all. Okay, that's a very simple thing. So the next thing is, team, implement actionable security events. What is implement actionable security events? And I want to tell you one more thing. When you talk about this automation, right? Let's say, for example, in Amazon Guard Duty, it's a SIEM tool. If you in the Guard Duty, you have basically seen there is a trigger or there is a kind of security attack. You have to create a function to respond to it. So you don't have to do anything there. You don't have to have a human effort to do there. The script will run and do it for you. So automation is a key. And the next thing is implement actionable security events. Alerting, that's all. We're talking about alerts. Whenever something goes wrong, get the things alerted immediately. That's it. And it must be automatically responded. This is a simple example for the detection concepts. Okay, that's it. You can go through this picture, team. It's very useful actually. See, this is what you call as detection. The next thing is, team, we have an infrastructure protection. This is the most important topic after this identity management. Why? Because infrastructure protection is a very important challenge actually. I want to show you a picture of this. Let's say, team, in our company, we have something called as zones. In every company, we know that there is something called as zones. Zone is there. Like, for example, we have a public zone, we have a private zone, we have a DMZ zone. We are creating the zones, or we are segmenting it to make sure that we have a proper mechanism to secure, right? So what we can do here is, let me show you a picture here. See, I can create multiple subnetworks. When you say subnetworks in AWS, you're talking about zones. Like, for example, let's say I am having an AWS account. In AWS account, we are having subnets or subnetworks. And when you say subnets, what you're talking about is the various zones. Let's say I can give you a simple picture here to make it more clear. See, this is a very simple example picture. It's not a big deal to understand, very simple actually. See this, team. In this picture, you can see that. See, we have a VPC here. This is my VPC. So in the VPC, we have a production. So we have a network, or we have a subnetwork, or we have a zone 1. We have a zone 2. Zone 1, I want to make sure that all these servers are able to access from the public. Zone 2, I want to make sure that these servers must not be accessible from the public. So I can have a multi-layered security here. How? Like for example, in the VPC level, we have something called as a VPC firewall now. Now there is a VPC firewall. We have a AWS DDoS protection. AWS Shield is there for protection here. And after that, when you go for subnets or when you go for zones, we have a network ACL. Then when you go for the instance, you have a security group. So if a person wants to attack this particular server, first of all, he has to bypass the VPC firewall. Then he has to bypass the network ACL. Then he has to bypass security group. Then he has to bypass the OS firewall. Then only he will be able to access the application. So we have actually 4 layers of protection here. See this? We can increase it also. So defense in depth approach is very important when you talk about the zoning and all. Okay. If you want to talk about zones and all, you must have a proper defense in depth approach. Okay. That's it. That's the first thing I want to tell you. Okay. The next thing is create multiple network segments or network layers. Like group them. Like for example, web servers must be placed in a single layer. There is an internet access, and database servers must be placed in a location where there is no internet access. The communication happens only through this particular network. Only this particular IP is allowed. Like the same way, I can create layers. And I can control the access to the layers using various mechanisms like firewalls, then third-party firewalls, then we have a network ACLs, then we have a security groups, then we have a OS firewall. By using a lot of mechanisms like this, I can control the traffic to all these layers. But it's not a big deal. It's very simple, but only make sure you have to know how the traffic is flowing. Before you implement it, just try to draw a diagram and try to visualize it in your mind. That's all. Then we have a automated network protection. That means that we must have a proper threat intelligence mechanism and a self-defending network. How do I do that? Implement a proper intrusion detection or prevention system to make sure that we can proactively adapt to the, and always make sure we inspect traffic. Okay. We have to inspect traffic. Okay. So what happens is that we have to make sure that we always offer web application firewall and other mechanisms to inspect the traffic and to make sure that the traffic is properly secured. Okay. That's it. I want to tell you a few more things as a part of this. Yeah, definitely I'll share. Okay. I'll share the product in definitely. So then the next thing is infrastructure protection. When you say infrastructure protection, what happens that in the compute, what about the compute? Compute means I'm talking about the server. So always make sure that the server must be protected with the help of a vulnerability assessment solution. And if the server is not required to be public, make sure it is completely in a private location. Always make sure the number of servers we place in the internet must be reduced. So if you have more servers or more services which is facing the internet, it can give you a lot of security issues. And always use what is a managed service team? When you say the word called as managed services, whenever you say the word managed, that means it is managed by the cloud service provider like Amazon RDS, AWS Lambda, AWS Containers, ECS. So all these things are managed services. And automate your protection. Make a mechanism to automatically do the vulnerability assessment and the mechanisms. And then always make sure validation is mandatory. Like for example, verify your code properly. More than the security issue which can happen in your infrastructure, I have seen most issues happen with the code. Let's say, for example, team, I have done every security in AWS, every possible security in AWS. But if your code is vulnerable, that means your application can be compromised. Okay, that's it. The next thing is that we have a mechanism called as data protection. Okay, we have a mechanism called as data protection. So when you talk about the cloud platform, the most fearsome word we always have in the industry is data. If the data is not protected, then your whole thing can be lost, right? It can affect your business, it can affect your compliance, it can affect your security, it can affect your customers, everything. The primary thing is that identify what kind of data you're handling. First thing is that identify what kind of data you're handling and how to classify it. Who is on? Then how do I control? See, I'll give an example, team. Many people has misunderstood the advantage of using the AWS S3 and all. See, now I told you, okay, we have a mechanism called as IAM to ensure the security access. So we can use IAM plus we can have a mechanism called as bucket policies. See, we have a mechanism called as bucket policies. I'll give an example. See, I open a AWS S3 bucket here. See, I am having a S3 bucket here. I'm opening a bucket here. And when I open a bucket here, I can see the option called as permissions. So here, I can write my policy here. I can write my bucket policy here. What is a bucket policy? This bucket policy ensures that who is allowed to access my bucket, in what ways. So by having a bucket policy, by having an IAM policy, by having a monitoring and all, I can ensure my data is protected. And always use mechanisms like versioning and all. Like, what is versioning? Whenever you make any unauthorized changes to this particular thing, you can always revert back to the previous version. That's what we call as versioning. Then automate the identification and classification. Automating the process of identifying the data and classifying it is always a very important thing, and we know. And this is a very important thing, team. Define the data lifecycle management. What is data lifecycle, team? As per the compliance requirements, let's say, for example, as per the HIPAA compliance, I want to make sure that my data is there for 5 years. So how do I keep it for 5 years and how do I delete it? I have to create a policy for that. How do I create a policy? Okay, let's say this data must be there for the next 30 days in Amazon S3. And after 30 days, the data must be taken to Amazon Glacier. And after 5 years, it must be deleted. Like the same way, I can define automated policies, which will handle the data automatically with the lifecycle. And this is something which you can learn for a lot of years, actually. Ensuring a proper encryption and key management. How much effective you are encrypting your data and managing the key file securely, you can have a security. And definitely, team, when you get time, please go through this particular service. This service is something which can be a very primary one for protecting your data. We have a service called as AWS KMS. If you can learn this service called as KMS or key management service, see, definitely client-side encryption is always not possible unless otherwise your company have mechanisms for that. That is, what is client-side encryption, team? When you say client-side encryption, you're talking about the encryption which you do in the on-premises. We encrypt some data and then we upload to the cloud platform. That's what we call as client-side encryption. But it's not practically feasible in every company. That is why we have a mechanism called as KMS. If you know how this service works, or if you know how this service can be utilized for your data, you can do a lot of security there. By doing this in an effective manner, you are getting a proper data security. KMS is something which is very important. And you have, whenever you get time, team, please go through this XSM and KMS. These two things are very important in your AWS data security strategy. Okay, that's it. And it's not about implementing, it's about continuous verifying. It's not about implementing, it's about verifying. And access control, I told you about bucket policies and all, right? And always use certificates to ensure that the data is basically encrypted in the transit. And everything must be authenticated. Because why? Because always make sure that we have a mechanism to properly authenticate things, like we have a mechanism like TLS, SSL, etc., IPsec and VPN, etc., for doing the authentication. Okay. And final, team, we have one more thing called as incident response strategy. We have something called as an incident. What is an incident response strategy, team? So when you say incident response strategy, it means that any unplanned event is called as incident, team. Okay. Any unplanned event is called as incident. There is nothing more to say. Like, for example, let's say a system is compromised, a credential is compromised, data is compromised. All these things are called as incidents. And everything is incident. Like, you have modified a security group, you have unauthorized modify a firewall, instance is compromised. If you want to have a proper incident response, the primary thing is that make a proper key strategy for that. What is a key strategy for that, team? That means that, to make it more simple, I'll tell you. Let's say, for example, if you want, this is not something which you do immediately when there is incident occurs. This is something which you have to do in a prepared, predefined manner. How do you anticipate? How do you respond to, or how do you recover from the incidents? Preparation is critical to timely and effectively do the investigation and respond to it and recover from an incident. First of all, team, you have to identify the key person. Like, for example, who is responsible for what all resources you want to protect, what is sensitive, what is non-sensitive, what are the legal challenges. Like this, if you don't know this, you are done. What are the legal challenges? What happens if this data is compromised? So all these things you must be able to know as the initial thing. And based on all these things, develop a proper plan based on a company. You cannot get this plan in the internet team. You have to make this plan based on a company. Like, for example, let's say, you know that, okay, we have this data to protect. Whenever there is a compromise, how to communicate, how to trigger the escalation process, how to contact AWS, or in which case AWS will support me. All these things are something which you have to do in the incident management strategy. Then after that, the next thing is that prepare forensics. Krish, what is the difference between forensics in on-premise and cloud? No difference. In cloud, the only challenge is that the servers are the cloud service providers' premises. So because of that, there is no challenges there. What we have to do is we have to identify and prepare for the forensic investigation. Okay, how to identify and prepare for, like, for example, what are the tools we can use for forensic purposes, and how to automate this process. And so team, this is a very interesting thing. Let's say, for example, you feel that your server is compromised. When you feel your server is compromised, what is the first thing you have to do, team? Tell me. If you feel a server is compromised, what is the first thing you have to do? Isolation. Isolate it. First of all, we'll isolate him because I want to stop the spread. At the same way, when you have a server here, if you feel it's compromised, the first step is you will isolate it. And this can be automated also. And the next thing is the people who is handling the incident, have proper predefined access. Definitely reporting is also a part of this particular containment process. We have to immediately, basically start the process. And process is something which is very important to follow. And then always make sure the people who is basically involved in this process are having the proper access. And tools must be there for this particular incident response. See, you can't do this or deploy these tools after the incident. So be prepared to respond to it by enabling these tools prior to the incidents. Always make your tools in an alarmed way to basically prepare for the incident. And finally, test it. Do some mock drills where you're basically doing some simulations to make sure that you're able to respond to like some attacks, like pen testing scenarios and some offensive scenarios. Just try to do all these things to make sure that your infrastructure is protected. These are the key factors which you have to understand in a perspective overview of AWS. Okay, team, that's it. But definitely, team, one more thing is there. So how do we implement all these things? For implementing all these things, it's not a big deal. Once you learn these services properly, and if you have these points in your mind, you can automatically do it. Like, for example, okay, if I know AWS S3 security in detail, if I know IAM in detail, if I know VPC in detail, I can basically combine these together without any hassle because it's already there. You can basically combine it together very easily. All you have to do is learn these things in a very simple way. See, example, I told you the example of JSON. See, JSON is something which you don't have to learn. But when you require to do that, read the code or try to read the code and try to customize something, play with it. You will be able to do it. That's all. Okay. There's no point you learn that JSON or Python completely. All you want to do is you want to make the things effective and working for you. So prepare for that, not for the other things. Okay. That's it. Thank you, teams.